Hello, friends. Welcome to the ATC Double Cut. In today's episode, I have a very special guest. Some of you may recognize him. It is Dr. Michael Bekken, who recently graduated from the University of Wisconsin. And where are you now, Michael?
I'm in southern Norway now, in just a town called Grimstad, working for the Norwegian Institute for Bioeconomy here.
Okay, wow. So, how did you end up going from Madison, Wisconsin, all the way to Norway?
Yeah, absolutely. After I graduated in May of 2022 from Doug Soldat's lab in Madison, I accepted a Fulbright scholarship to do a one-year research project at University of Oslo, and that was studying something a bit different from my PhD, which was golf course resource use. But during that Fulbright year in Oslo, I studied carbon cycling in peatlands in Norway, especially drained peatlands, and their carbon emissions to the atmosphere, and how we try to reduce that. And then during that year, it wasn't my intention to stay in Norway, but Trygve Amelid and his lab here at NIBIO, the Norwegian Institute for Bioeconomy, had an open position in the turfgrass research group, and also we're looking for somebody that could continue some peatland work as well. And so just seemed like a kind of unbelievable fit. And so I started here a couple months ago, and have ended up staying in Norway a lot longer than I originally thought I would.
Awesome. Well, welcome back to the wonderful turfgrass world.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you. Good to be here.
Michael, this being the ATC double cut, we have to talk about one of the ATC blog posts to start the conversation. And the one that I'm going to use today has a title of What's the Best Way to Keep Up with All You're Doing? And in it, I list the ways to keep up with the research that I'm doing or with the information that I'm sharing. And one of those ways is email newsletters. In fact, I plan to send out an email newsletter this afternoon with an announcement about an upcoming conference in Thailand. And if you happen to not get that newsletter, it probably means that you're not signed up to it. So you can go to this blog post, which I'll put a direct link to in the show notes, and you can find out the social media channels that you can keep up with me, or the ATC website, or the podcasts, or Pace Turf, or the email newsletters, or the YouTube channel, or whatever. There's all kinds of ways to keep up with how I'm sharing turfgrass information. And when I knew that you would be able to talk with me and we could record this episode, I thought, you know what? There's that really interesting grassland research article that you wrote, and I mentioned this in a previous ATC update newsletter. And I said, this is a really good article that shows what's normal for nitrogen use on golf courses. So let's talk about that article a little bit. Let's see. I think I can show that on the screen. Some people are watching this, and most people will be listening. But I think, how do I find that? Yeah. All right. That's showing on the screen now. It's the correction to the article quantifying golf course nitrogen use efficiency. And the correction was not changing any of the conclusions. It was just updating some of the calculations. This is a wonderful open access article, which means nobody has to pay to read it. They can get it for free. And I thought this was really interesting. Quantifying golf course nitrogen use efficiency. The number one thing that I found interesting was table 4. And when I read the original paper, I like from the very start, I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome because they're going to be able to calculate how much nitrogen people are actually using compared to how much we would expect them to use based on their location. Because Madison, Wisconsin, you expect to use different amount of nitrogen than Havana, Cuba, right?
Right, right. Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah, so I got to the table 4, which I'm now showing the corrected table 4 here, and so I anyways awesome. Table 4 has a table caption of N max values that allowed the growth potential nitrogen requirement model to predict mean nitrogen use on golf courses for both cool and warm season turf grasses. And um, yeah, can you, I don't know, tell
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
like why, maybe just an overview of why that's an interesting article, why you did the research, and then maybe we'll talk about some of these specifics, like why I'm so excited about table
Yeah.
4.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. So, why we did the research is we were interested in uh, establishing how much nitrogen, well, phosphorus and potassium too, but this article focuses on nitrogen, how much nitrogen golf courses use, what the variation in nitrogen use is across golf courses. But then what we were most interested in is trying to determine what causes that variation. Why does one golf course, say, use more nitrogen than another golf course? Is it a difference in climate? Is it a difference in management practices? Maybe it's a difference in soil type or a difference in grass type, because there's so many things that could cause variation in how much nitrogen you use, uh, that we wanted to try to quantify how much is being used, uh, what the variance is, and then try to explain why that variance is occurring. And so that was the um, basic framework that we brought to the research.
and And what were the main conclusions that you
Yeah.
found?
So the main conclusions, the the mean amount or the average amount of nitrogen that is being used on golf courses is not a surprise. We did this work around the U.S. and around Europe, and we found similar averages to other projects like the GCSAA environmental profile work. So that wasn't a big surprise. But what was a big surprise is how much variance there is between um, how much nitrogen is used both in different regions, but also especially how much variance there is within a region. So if you only look at golf courses in the upper Midwest, for example, around the area of Madison where I was working, um, some golf courses in the Midwest region will use far more than others. Some will use literally half the amount of nitrogen on a golf course that could be just down the street. And so we tried to start explaining that. We looked at, the management practices, we looked at soil type, we looked at grass type, all the things that I was saying. And basically what we concluded is that it's really hard to explain this variance. It doesn't seem to be related to soil type for the most part. It doesn't really seem to be related to grass type. It's not related to any of the management practices that golf courses tell us that they're using. And so in some ways you could say that we failed. We tried to explain all this variance with all these different variables, but we weren't able to do that, and so it left us still wondering why we have this variance. And the best we can tell is that it's sort of dependent on the manager. Um, that some managers just like to use or think that using a lot more nitrogen is needed, and some less. And that's that's the best we can do, is that it's really manager dependent. It's not dependent on any of the sort of management or environmental variables that we necessarily thought that it would be.
So it's the decision of people.
Yeah, it's the
Okay.
human element, I guess you could say.
And we can assume that all of you looked at stuff like green fees and rounds and stuff too. So even across like high budget or low budget, it wasn't only like that the higher the maintenance budget was or the higher the green fee was. Did that mean that they're necessarily going to use more nitrogen, or was that not really related either?
That's a great question. We did those tests. Yes. It turns out that green fee is not related to nitrogen rate. That maintenance budget is very weakly correlated, so there's not much of a relationship. Um, there is, if you look specifically in the Northwest region, which is the region that we had the most golf courses in our study, there was about 50 a, a 50% correlation between fertilizer budget and how much nitrogen you actually use. So about half the time when you have a higher fertilizer budget, when you're just spending more money on on fertilizers, you're actually using more nitrogen. And that was by far the strongest predictor that we could find to explain variance in nitrogen rate was just literally how much money are you spending. And
And
so I
but
guess the
that's only
lesson from that is
50%
if
of
you
the
want to
time
use
in
less nitrogen. Yeah, sorry, go
well,
ahead.
that's just 50% of the time in one region.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's not particularly helpful, not, not particularly strong predictor, but it's the strongest predictor we could find.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah, yeah,
that although maybe you didn't find the answer you were looking for, you found something interesting, which is it's interesting to know that. Um, I think that one could almost make an inspirational talk about this, saying, "Wow, there's people out there producing good turf grass," because you're checking from professionally managed turf grass sites. So I always say that by default that's going to be good turf grass. Because if you take a random sample of golf courses in the world, you're going to get some that are quite good. And so if you can't find a strong correlation between anything and nitrogen rate, then that means there's a great opportunity out there. There are people getting good results without putting a lot of nitrogen. And
yeah.
okay, so that's exciting. I can make the inspirational speech, but I bet there's people listening or watching that are like, why does this even matter? Why does Micah say that you can make an inspirational talk about being able to produce good turf with lower nitrogen? Why am I saying that less nitrogen would be desirable here? And could you kind of give us a view in terms of uh, greenhouse gas emissions, or uh, I mean, I guess that's kind of what it would come down to me. I'm guessing, but you study this, you can explain it. Why do I think less nitrogen is better? Is that right, or should people be saying, oh, there's an opportunity for people to put the proper amount of nitrogen, which might be higher? Can you explain
Right.
that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's so many environmental reasons why, and also economic reasons why using less nitrogen is a good idea. Of course, there's an optimal level of nitrogen use in managed turf grass, right? So I don't want to make the point that no nitrogen is the right amount. Certainly, turf grass needs to recover from damage, from traffic, and nitrogen is hugely helpful in that, obviously. So, um, but excess nitrogen is a problem environmentally because that nitrogen will leach through the soil profile, will find its way to groundwater sources, and it's a groundwater contaminant. A lot of areas of the U.S. now can't drink their groundwater because it has too much. Not a lot of areas, but certain areas in the Midwest, especially, can't drink their groundwater because it's got too much nitrogen, and that's toxic to us as humans, especially toxic to young children. It's also a problem in terms of surface water. Slight increases in the amount of nitrogen in surface water changes the chemistry of the water, and then also changes the the health of aquatic communities that live um, in in those water bodies. Problems with eutrophication and um, problems all up and down the aquatic food chain. And then you have the greenhouse gas emissions, which you were talking about. So the release of nitrous oxide into the atmosphere as a result of any nitrogen fertilizer application. So the more nitrogen you're applying, the more uh, nitrous oxide you're going to be emitting, which is not good for your carbon balance. It also takes there's a lot of embedded energy, a lot of embedded carbon in that nitrogen fertilizer itself because it takes a lot of energy to produce that. So just by using more, you are emitting more carbon in the supply chain. And so those are, some reasons, but then also from a budgeting standpoint or an economic standpoint, a golf course, it costs more to buy more fertilizer to apply that. And then also you can have this sort of synergistic sort of negative spiral. I think golf courses that are using too much nitrogen often have grass that's growing too fast. They're mowing more than they need to. They have surfaces that are accumulating more organic matter than they need to, and there's a whole host of problems with pests and water use that you get into. So um, there's just so many good reasons to not want to start that sort of downward spiral of being in a situation where you have too much nitrogen, too much organic matter, pest problems, and on down the road. So I've probably been talking for too long already, but that gives you
No,
some idea.
this is a podcast, and uh, we we know that the people that are listening to this are interested in these topics. So I'm sure that they are as equally fascinated in hearing what you have to say about this as I am. So yeah, I thank you for that comprehensive explanation. And I think it becomes more apparent to me now at this stage of my career than it did when I was a much younger person and was a golf course superintendent. 25 years ago, I was a golf course superintendent, and I kind of liked fertilizer because it made the grass healthier, I thought. And and if I put nitrogen, it made the grass greener, and it allowed the grass to grow. And I had mowers that I could send out to cut the grass. And if I cut the grass when it was green and growing, it would make the grass beautiful. And then people would give me compliments about how the golf course looked. And I wasn't thinking about, certainly I wasn't thinking about greenhouse gas emissions at all. I was using what I thought was relatively affordable sources of nitrogen. So the fertilizer cost wasn't a huge factor for me, and I I didn't think long term about this is accumulating more thatch. This is causing me to have to mow more than I otherwise would. This is causing me to have to manage thatch or top dress more than I otherwise would, because I just kind of thought that mowing was normal. I thought that top dressing was normal. I thought that thatch just accumulated. That was 25 years ago. And I think every year I've learned a little bit more, and I hope I continue to learn. And now I just think, man, if we can stop that thatch from accumulating in the first place, if we can mow less, it's just going to make our jobs easier, assuming that we're still meeting the desired standard of turfgrass performance. And so there's a logic to maintenance that I get with more experience that I am excited about and I like to share with people. And I think that variance that you saw around the average, meaning there's an average value that I'm so excited about that's in table 4, which I'm going to put back up on the screen. I'm so excited about what that average is because it's really useful for me to know what's normal, what people are doing. But what's exciting is that some people are applying twice as much, some people are applying half as much as that, or maybe an even wider range. If you did a bigger survey, you may find an even wider range within the same region with the same grass. So that tells you from the data that you collected that it's possible to do better than we're currently doing, and we're not saying anybody out there is doing bad. It's just I look at it as like, wow, what a room for improvement we have.
Yeah, right, right. I mean, I think that's one of the take home messages is like assuming that all of the golf courses in our study are meeting some standard of performance, which I think is a reasonable assumption. That basically that means that some people are able to get by with a lot less nitrogen than others, uh, and also I think what's interesting is that I think that you can use maintenance budget as kind of a proxy for how nice a golf course is in a lot of circumstances. Like the more you have to manage the golf course, generally the nicer the golf course is. But there's very little, at least for nitrogen, there's very little correlation to what your maintenance budget is and how much nitrogen you're using. So that means that a lot of high maintenance budget golf courses, which are presumably very high quality golf courses, are actually not using that much nitrogen. And so in some ways, I think we are stumbling into a quantification of manager skill. Some people are really skilled at not using very much nitrogen, but still producing a really nice, high quality golf course. And I think that's what we sort of want to. That's what we want to strive for.
Yeah, and then let's figure out what those particular skills are and what particular techniques those people are using to get really
Yeah,
high quality turf with
yeah,
less nitrogen than others are using, and then
right.
uh, let's on a large scale try to implement those. And what would we get? We get better golfing surfaces, presumably, and
Hmm.
perhaps the ability to reallocate some of the resources. Like it takes a lot of time to mow fairways, so if you're applying more nitrogen than necessary to fairways, and maybe there's a better use of time than mowing fairways. So
Right, right. Absolutely,
good.
absolutely.
So
Yep.
let's talk about these numbers in the table 4 that I've referred to. Um, I I'm gonna look at that. So table 4, it's linking the nitrogen rate on a monthly basis to the growth potential calculation. If anybody's interested in this, search my website or read this paper to learn more about it, or go to the paceturf.org website to read more about growth potential. But basically, the growth potential is a function that takes the air temperature at a location and it converts that and just says, okay, for the effective temperature, are the temperatures really good for grass to grow, or are the temperatures way too cold or way too hot? And it puts a number to that on a 0 to 100% scale, or just 0 to 1. And it turns out that you can link when the you can link nitrogen use to that, because you assume if the temperature is freezing, the grass won't grow, so the nitrogen requirement will be 0, and that's when the growth potential is 0 also. So you end up linking um, the the expected nitrogen use of the grass, or the nitrogen fertilizer requirement of the grass, to how much it's growing, and you predict that by GP. It's kind of crude, but it turns out to be really effective because it makes a beautiful growth curve that works for anywhere in the world. It's not exactly how the grass is going to grow, but it's a nice approximation of what how close the temperatures are to optimum for photosynthesis or not. And so you did this survey data and you checked. You're like, how does this work? And you calculated what the maximum value was that you would link to GP to actually fit the average of the data that you collected in the survey. And
Exactly.
I've never done any research about this, so I've just always been kind of guessing at what numbers I would use. And the original Pace Turf recommendation was for 0.8 pounds, I believe, for cool season grass per month as a maximum, or 4 grams of nitrogen per square meter, or 40 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. And I realized that if you do that, the grass grows too fast. So I've dropped that down. I wrote a 2013 article describing how I recommend linking nitrogen to growth potential to make a prediction. And in that, I think I used the number of 3 grams of nitrogen per square meter, or 0.6 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, or 30 grams of nitrogen per hectare, as what I would recommend as a maximum value. But that was 10 years ago. Over the past 10 years, I've noticed that a lot of people are using less nitrogen, still producing good results. So, certainly for creeping bent grass on putting greens, I've been using 2 grams of nitrogen as a maximum. So, I've cut in half what the original recommendation was, and I've
Mhm.
cut by 50% what my recommendation was only 10 years ago, because I saw what's actually working. But I haven't done research on it. I was just guessing. So you come up with the value. The average in your survey for cool season grass on greens was 2.3 grams, or 23 kilograms per hectare. And I was like, wow,
Mhm.
that is wonderful to know that number, that's the average. And so thank you
Yeah,
so much. I,
yeah.
I was just so excited about that.
Yeah, yeah, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Yeah, no, absolutely. That it was originally a smaller value than we thought, right? So, you have this growth potential that is this growth curve. And then, what you show in your 2013 article is that then you can use that growth potential and multiply that basically by what you call or an n max parameter. So, like how much at a perfect growth potential, at 100% growth potential, what's the maximum amount of nitrogen that you want to use under that perfect growing condition? And that's, it's a qualitative parameter. It's what you think the maximum N rate should be. And then if you multiply those two things together, what the growth potential is times what the maximum amount of nitrogen that you want to use, then when that growth potential is less than one, let's say it's 50%, then you'll use half the maximum amount of nitrogen because the grass presumably is growing at half of its maximum rate. And so, yeah, exactly. Our goal with the study was to see in our survey data what the Nmax parameter um, that people are basically what they're using. I mean, we know that they're not all of them are using this model, but if they were using the model, what is the Nmax parameter
that that
that
matches
they're
their.
that matches their fertilizer
Hmm.
program?
Hmm.
There you go. And so, yeah, what we came out with was, I think that's quite interesting. I didn't know that story about you dropping it down to 2 grams per square meter for your NMAX parameter. And that's essentially what we found, the golf course superintendents in our survey, which covered 5 different regions of the US and 3 in Europe, have basically arrived at the same conclusion that you did.
Hmm.
But what I would note is that we did this for C3 or cool season or C4 warm season grasses. Is that in our survey, golf course superintendents that are managing warm season grasses are using an Nmax parameter of 4.7
Hmm.
essentially, which is more than double for putting greens.
Yep.
It was more than double than cool season grasses. So I don't know. Does that surprise you, Micah, a little bit?
No, because for I'll tell you what I use for different grasses.
Yeah.
For Synodon, for Bermuda grass on putting greens, I use 40 kilograms per hectare or 4 grams. That's my maximum. And see, I was so happy that what I'm currently using as maximums came in lower than what your survey said, because I always tell people, if you put nitrogen or you put any kind of fertilizer, if you put too much, it's really hard to get that back. Like if
Yeah.
you over applied, you're not going to get that back. But if you under apply, you can always go out and put out a little bit more. So what I'm trying to do is like set it so that we don't over apply. And so I was glad that my Bermuda number, my Synodon number, was 4 grams, linked to a maximum growth potential of 1. And I guess, people have been asking me over the past few days. I've been giving seminars in France and talking about, how would you do ryegrass? What would I use as a standard for ryegrass if it was on a football pitch or something? And, I think, I might use 4 as a standard for ryegrass also. And then for seashore paspalum, I use 3 grams of nitrogen per square meter, 30 kilograms per hectare, or 0.6 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And for Poa annua, I also use 3 currently. And for bentgrass and for zoysia, I drop it down to 2. And for fescue, I kind of guess at it, but I kind of feel like 2, or maybe for fescue I might even go a little bit lower. Um, so those are the numbers that I use. So I definitely vary it by species and by warm season. So it didn't surprise me that's the number that you got for greens, because I think for the warm season greens it's mostly going to be Bermuda grass that you were measuring, or
Yeah.
or the survey respondents were growing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the other thing we did here was calculate what that Nmax parameter is on tees, fairways, and roughs, and then
Mm-hmm.
an area weighted average across the whole golf course. Um, and basically, if you go all the way down to roughs, the Nmax parameter that people are using is about what 0.7 grams per square meter per month. Um, and then if you average over the whole golf course, it's about 1 gram per square meter per month of nitrogen. And so, yeah, I don't know if people are using growth potential and maximum nitrogen requirement outside of greens, but if they are, that's what we found there.
Yeah, it is fascinating, and that is table 4 out of a table and figure packed article, and I think it's fascinating. So Michael, we suddenly have used almost 30 minutes talking about this. I actually wanted to talk about. Can we talk about real quick about
Sure.
your other paper that was in the International Turfgrass Society Research Journal, um, and that article. The title was Estimated Energy Use and Greenhouse Gas Emissions Associated with Golf Course Turfgrass Maintenance in the Northern USA. And let's just talk about like that key point in the abstract about what you can do. Maybe
Uh,
give us a quick overview of that, and then we'll just talk about why fuel is the number one source of greenhouse gas emissions by far, and just
mhm.
let people recognize that. And then maybe we'll talk about that on a future episode if you'll agree to join me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'd happily do a full episode with you on just carbon. But the short story is that if you look at all of the different sources of carbon emissions in golf course turf grass maintenance, that includes the production of fertilizers and pesticides and a whole life cycle analysis. So not only the energy being used at the golf course, but all of the energy, embedded energy in the supply chain of what it takes to run a golf course. What comes out is the major emission factors are fuel use, as you said, is the top uh, emission category, and then also electricity use is a big emitter, at least in the area of the world where we did the study, which was in the northern U.S. And so the question is, how do you reduce emissions in golf course turf grass maintenance? Well, you target those two big categories, and my recommendation is to start to switch to electric maintenance equipment and make sure that you are sourcing low carbon electricity. And so then you address those two top categories of emissions. You address the fuel use. You're going to start using less fuel because you're charging your equipment as opposed to filling it with fuel. And
Yeah,
then the electricity that you need to charge that equipment and to run everything else at your maintenance facility, if that's coming from a low carbon source, then you've addressed that area of emissions as well.
thank you. So this article, I'll put a link to it also. This is also an open access article, so anybody can read it, and it's written in a very accessible style. So I think it is easily understandable because everybody knows about these topics, about the work that's done to maintain golf courses. Um, I I sometimes get the question. People say, "Well, my electricity is generated from a coal burning power plant, so I don't need to elect. What benefit do I have of electrifying the equipment if it's just going to be using electricity that comes from coal?" But there's huge efficiency improvements by using electric engines over diesel or gasoline engines. So
Absolutely.
the I don't know if it's a factor of 3 or a factor of 4, but it's something like that. That simply by using an electric powered motor to do the work, even if you're using the dirtiest electricity generating source available, you still reduce the emissions by a huge amount. Do you know
Absolutely.
about that?
Yeah, we've run those calculations to answer exactly that question. And yes, even a coal burning power plant is much more energy efficient than an internal combustion engine. So you still, if you switch from a gasoline mower to an electric mower that is powered from is powered by coal, essentially, you're still going to reduce your emissions. It depends exactly, but somewhere between 30 and 50%. Um, and if you, let's say, I don't know, installed solar panels on the roof of your maintenance building, then that would go from a 30 to 50% reduction to pretty close to a 90, 95% reduction in the amount of electricity that you're using. It's never 100% reduction because it still costs carbon to produce those solar panels and bring them to your facility and all that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty close to 100% if you start using a clean carbon source.
Yeah, that I appreciate that explanation, and I have a blog post about that also. Dr. Mike Richardson asked me that question, and I made some calculations and answered it. So I'll put a link to that uh, in the show notes also. Just kind of trying to explain that even if you're using coal powered electricity, it's still better to use electric equipment rather than gasoline or diesel powered. And I was in Finland a week ago, and I had a really interesting talk with Janne Leto, who is the golf course superintendent at Hersala Golf, and they've recently completely changing their fleet of fairway mowers to electrically powered machines, auto mowers, robotic auto mowers, and 75% of their rough is now mowed by auto mowers. And I think eventually they'll transition completely to electric mowing equipment, maybe except for the putting greens, but all the fairways, all of the rough. And so I was talking with Janne, and I have a video about that. I can also put a link to that so you can hear his experience with that. And I asked him, well, okay, so your diesel cost went down a lot. And he's like, yeah, they're using 90% less fuel, so that went down. And I'm like, well, I guess your electricity costs went up. And he said, well, no, because we put solar panels on the roof of the clubhouse, and that powers our fleet. So it's like, yeah, there's so many cool things that are happening around the world with producing good surfaces, great golfing experiences, trying to do so in the most sustainable way. And I'm glad that I get to learn about some of those and get a chance to talk with people like you who are doing research that helps explain and give ideas about what we can do.
Cool. Yeah. No, happy to do it. Just a pleasure to be here.
All right, Dr. Becken. Well, I need to get checked out of this hotel room and get heading to the airport for a bit of a journey. So
Yeah. Long flight back. Safe travels.
yeah, thank you. So I think we may have a chance to talk again, and I'll see you at the conference in Thailand in March, which is going to be great. And yeah, we're not so far away. Anything else before we go?
No, just thanks for having me. Look forward to having another conversation about carbon and in full, and excited to be coming to the conference in Thailand next March.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks, Michael. Thanks everybody for listening. And yeah, it's funny. The last time I saw Michael, the last time I remember meeting in person, we were in Copenhagen.
That's right, and that's where you are right now. How
And
about
that's where I am right now. So I'll sign off, say goodbye to everyone for ATC from Copenhagen. I am Michael Woods. Bye bye.